Elena sat at the dinner table, quiet, her face calm but heavy. She wore a soft beige blouse, her hair pulled back neatly, her eyes tired from years of everything she hadn't said. Across from her, Brian leaned back in his chair like he always did, sipping wine with the smug air of a man who thought control was a birthright. His mother, Judith, sat at the head of the table like a queen draped in pearls and expectations. Kevin, his brother, didn't even glance up from his phone, and Grace, the youngest sibling, watched with her signature half-smirk like she was attending a private drama made just for her entertainment. Brian cleared his throat, then spoke with calculated cruelty. "You know what, Elena? Maybe it's time you pack your things and leave. You don't belong here. You never did." For a moment, no one said a word. A fork clinked against a plate, someone shifted in their seat, but no one looked shocked. Judith nodded almost imperceptibly, as if this moment had been preordained. Kevin let out a short laugh, not even looking up, and Grace stirred her drink as though Elena's humiliation was the evening's main event. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. Her eyes didn't even widen. But beneath the table, her hand curled into a quiet fist. Just near her feet, tucked carefully inside her handbag, was a folder. Inside the folder was the truth. The deed to the house, the mortgage documents, a letter from her attorney. The house didn't belong to Brian. It never had. Her heart beat faster, but her face remained unreadable. She scanned the table, looking at each face, each person who once smiled at her, and now looked through her like she was something inconvenient. She said nothing, not yet. She wasn't ready to speak, but she was done being silent. Elena had grown up in the narrow shadows of Detroit's West Side, where dreams had to be bigger than the streets you walked. Her mother worked nights, and her father was never around long enough to know which grade she was in. Elena learned early that no one was coming to save her, so she saved herself. She worked mornings at a bakery, cleaned offices in the evenings, and tutored neighborhood kids on weekends, all while carrying a full college load. She didn't have time to complain. She just kept going, even when she was tired, even when her feet ached and her textbooks were secondhand and her dreams felt impossibly far. After graduating, she didn't wait for luck. She partnered with a quiet, brilliant friend, and together they started investing in small properties. She never put her name on the front of anything. She didn't crave attention. She craved security. And one of those properties was the very home everyone in this room assumed belonged to Brian. Brian, in contrast, grew up in marble-tiled comfort. Family money, shiny cars, summer trips abroad. He never had to hustle. He walked into rooms like the air belonged to him. Elena had found that confidence charming at first. He was funny, attentive, magnetic. She thought his bravado was strength. She thought her love could soften his sharper edges. She thought love would be enough. They married after a whirlwind year, and for a while things seemed good. They laughed. They danced in the kitchen. They planned vacations. But over time, things shifted. Brian began asking why she worked late, then why she needed to work at all. He didn't shout. He didn't hit. He just slowly rewrote the rules. He made jokes about her modest upbringing. He called her his little hard worker in front of his family with a condescension wrapped in sugar. And they followed his lead. Judith called her pretty but plain, her compliments laced with ice. Kevin never spoke to her unless it was to challenge something he assumed she wouldn't understand. Grace played the role of friendly antagonist, always whispering to Elena that she was lucky Brian took a chance on her. Brian let it happen. Sometimes he even laughed along, Other times he'd say Elena was being too sensitive. Eventually, she stopped arguing. She stopped sharing her wins at work. She stopped inviting her friends to the house. Slowly, she stopped speaking at all. 5 years passed like that. Elena tried. She cooked more, smiled more, folded herself smaller to fit his comfort. But it wasn't enough. Brian grew colder, more distant, more controlling. He told his family she wouldn't survive without him. He spun a version of her that suited his ego. Elena said nothing, but she never forgot who she was. She remembered working 3 jobs, sleeping on a friend's couch, skipping meals to afford tuition. She remembered buying this house in her name before she ever met him. She had kept every paper, not because she expected things to fall apart, but because she knew the world rarely protected women like her. She hoped she'd never have to use them. She still believed, foolishly perhaps, that Brian would remember who she was, that he'd treat her like a partner again. But that night, at the dinner table, when he told her to leave what he claimed was his house, something broke open. Not loudly, quietly, like a rope finally slipping free, and suddenly she was done pretending. After dinner, Brian stood up and declared a family meeting. Everyone stayed seated, their wine glasses still half full, their faces half bored. He began listing Elena's failings one by one, as if reading off a grocery list. He said she was ungrateful, said she didn't cook enough, didn't clean properly, didn't serve him like a real wife should. He accused her, falsely, of cheating. And he did it all with flair, his voice rising as if he were performing. Judith nodded, proud. Kevin snorted. Grace stirred her drink again. Then came the final blow. "You need to leave tonight," he said. "This is my house and you're not welcome here anymore." No one objected. No one said, "That's not fair." Elena stood slowly. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained composed. Without a word, she left the room. Brian assumed she was going upstairs to pack her things. But Elena had no intention of packing. She walked straight to the bedroom closet, opened the safe, and took out the folder. Her steps back down the stairs were calm, deliberate. She entered the dining room, placed the folder gently on the table in front of Brian, and looked him in the eye. "Get out," she said. 2 words, spoken softly, but they shattered the room. Brian's smirk faltered. He opened the folder, eyes scanning the deed, the mortgage, the letter from her lawyer. "You tricked me," he spat, voice shaking. "You planned this all along." Judith slammed her palm on the table. "You think buying a house makes you better than us?" Grace rolled her eyes. "You were always sneaky. Now we know why." Kevin muttered something about how Elena never belonged. But she didn't move. She didn't shout. She stood, hands at her sides, and said evenly, "I bought this house before I ever met any of you. I kept it quiet because I didn't want to embarrass Brian. I thought it would hurt his pride. But that night, when you told me to leave, I realized something. You were always loud, and I was just tired." 1,000 memories flickered behind her eyes, working double shifts, living in silence, swallowing insults. Brian lunged to grab the folder. Elena stepped back. "Don't." "Fine," he sneered. "Take me to court." She reached into the folder again and handed him another paper. "I already did." He grabbed it, read it, and froze. It was an eviction notice. He and his family had 30 days. Judith stood, shaking. "This is cruel." "I gave him 5 years," Elena replied. The room spun with tension, but she was immovable. "You humiliated me in front of everyone," she said to Brian. "You accused me of cheating in a house I paid for, while you lived here rent-free." Kevin scoffed. "So now you think you're the queen?" "No," she said. "I'm just someone who's done being used." Grace crossed her arms, voice thick with resentment. "You always thought you were better." "I never said that," Elena replied. "But I worked, I built, I survived, and I won't let anyone rewrite my story." Brian had no words. For once, the charm had run out. Elena didn't wait for applause or permission. She began clearing the dishes from the table, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just flipped their entire world on its axis. Judith grabbed her purse and muttered, "You'll regret this." Elena didn't look up. "I stopped waiting to be seen." One by one, they filed out of the room. Only Brian remained, staring at the paper. "You waited for the perfect moment," he whispered. "No," she said. "I waited for the last one." And with that, she left him sitting in silence, in a house he never truly owned, now echoing with the power of everything he had never expected. A woman choosing herself. The house was eerily quiet after the family had left. Brian had retreated to the guest room like nothing had changed, as if the last few hours hadn't been a volcanic eruption, but just a passing moment in time. He walked around the house as though it was still his, flipping on the television, leaving dirty dishes in the sink, and acting like a man still in control. Elena didn't engage. She didn't argue. She didn't clean up after him either. For the first time in years, she didn't care. The silence felt different now. It wasn't the suffocating silence she had lived with for so long, the kind that made her shrink into the background, constantly doubting her worth. No, this silence was hers, and it felt like freedom. She had already made her decision. She wasn't going to be a ghost in her own home anymore, and she wasn't going to apologize for the strength she was finally letting show. The next few days passed in a blur of organizing her thoughts, cleaning up remnants of her past life, and sorting through the papers that proved her right. She hired a moving company to take Brian's things, not for him, but because it was time. She moved forward, setting the house in order, not to return it to the way it was, but to make it hers again, to finally make it feel like her home and not a place where she just existed. One afternoon, as she was carefully arranging new furniture in the living room, the doorbell rang. Elena paused, a little surprised. She hadn't expected visitors. She opened the door to find a woman standing there, holding a folder, her tired eyes locked on Elena's. She was around Elena's age, well-dressed but with an air of quiet exhaustion about her. Elena didn't know this woman, but there was something familiar about her presence, like a ripple that had traveled far but had only just now reached the shore. "Are you Elena?" the woman asked quietly, her voice low but clear. Elena nodded, slightly confused, unsure of who this could be. "My name's Janelle," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly as she introduced herself. I need to talk to you about Brian." Elena's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't show it. She stepped aside to let Janelle in, gesturing toward the living room. They sat down across from one another, and Janelle opened the folder she was holding, revealing documents, emails, photographs, and printed messages. "I was engaged to Brian before you were," Janelle continued, her voice steady despite the pain behind her words. "At least, I thought I was. I had no idea he was seeing someone else, let alone married you. He promised me everything, then disappeared without a word, took some money and just vanished." Elena's eyes flicked to the documents, then back to Janelle's face. There was no hesitation in her, no shock. This wasn't a revelation to her. It was another piece of the puzzle falling into place, a truth that was just as much hers as it was Janelle's. "I'm sorry," Janelle added, almost as if on instinct. "I didn't want to get involved, but when I found out about you, I had to come. I thought you should know the truth." Elena nodded, her expression calm. "Thank you. I knew he wasn't who I thought he was, but it's not your fault. You're not the first person he's lied to." Janelle's eyes softened with a mix of regret and sympathy. "I never thought it would go this far. I didn't want to bring you any more pain, but I couldn't stay silent when I knew the full story." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared betrayal hanging in the air. Elena's mind was already working. The pieces were falling into place. She'd suspected something was off with Brian for a long time, but this confirmed it. And it wasn't just about the lies anymore. It was about something much deeper. She'd spent too many years pretending, too many years bending to his will, and now, with every lie that surfaced, with every truth that was revealed, she saw the opportunity to reclaim what had always been hers. "Don't worry," Elena said, finally breaking the silence. "I'm not going to let this go. You've done what you needed to. And now, it's time for me to do what I need to." Janelle looked at her, relieved but still cautious. "What are you going to do?" Elena's lips curled into a small, quiet smile. "Take him to court." The sound of the door closing behind Janelle echoed in Elena's mind as she walked back to her desk, where her lawyer's number was already dialed. She didn't need to think twice about what came next. Brian had crossed every line, and now it was her turn to make things right. That night, after she finished with the lawyer and finalized a few things, she found herself standing in front of the mirror, staring at the woman who had once believed she was small. A woman who had once thought love meant sacrificing everything for someone else. But now she realized that wasn't love at all. Love, real love, meant standing tall and not apologizing for who you were or what you deserved. Elena had kept so much of herself hidden for so long, afraid of losing something she thought she needed. But now she realized she had been holding the key to her own freedom all along. The house wasn't just walls and windows, it was proof of who she had always been. Strong, capable, independent, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her anymore. The next morning, Elena stood in front of Brian as he casually sat on the couch, watching television like he didn't have a care in the world. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to explain herself anymore. This time, she was done with silence. "Brian," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "I need to talk to you." He looked up at her, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "What now?" "I spoke to Janelle," Elena said calmly, watching his face change from smugness to uncertainty. "She had proof about your lies, your manipulation, everything." He stood, the color draining from his face as he took a step toward her. "You spoke to her? You don't know what you're talking about, Elena." "No," she said, holding up a stack of papers she had been keeping hidden. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. You lied to me. And now you're going to pay for it." Brian's face flushed with anger, his hands trembling. "You planned this from the start," he shouted. "This was all a setup." Elena stood still, unmoving, as she let the words wash over her. He could yell, he could accuse, but it didn't matter anymore. She was done being manipulated. She was done being silent. "I didn't plan anything," Elena said, her voice steady. "I waited for the right moment to take my life back. And that moment is now." Brian stepped toward her, reaching out to snatch the papers from her hands. She didn't move. she didn't flinch. Instead, she took a deep breath, one last time, before saying the words that would change everything. "I'm filing for divorce, and you're leaving this house now." The tension in the room grew thick, suffocating. Brian, still processing the reality of the situation, stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without any words escaping. Elena didn't wait for him to say anything more. She didn't need him to apologize. She had already moved on. "You've lost," she said quietly, the words hanging in the air like a final exhale of relief. As she turned and walked out of the room, leaving him standing there, Elena finally felt like she could breathe again. This time, the silence wasn't a prison. It was a freedom she had fought for, and it was hers. The court date was set just a few weeks after Elena's final confrontation with Brian. Every day in between felt like a slow burn, like a stretch of time where everything and nothing was happening at once. She'd never expected to find herself here, not like this. Divorce wasn't the life she had imagined, but she had come to understand that sometimes it wasn't about what you wanted, it was about what you deserved. Elena had already begun making changes. The house was no longer just a shelter. It was her sanctuary. She repainted the walls in soft, calming shades, rearranged the furniture, and slowly, carefully, made it a space that reflected her strength, not her silence. She let the natural light in, something she hadn't done in years, and for the first time, she could breathe in her own home. She worked with her lawyer to finalize the documents, making sure everything was in order. Brian had tried to fight back. He sent letters. He called, but she never answered. Each move he made only reminded her of how far he had fallen. He wasn't the man she had married. He was a liar, a manipulator, and now he was facing the consequences of his actions. The morning of the trial, Elena stood in front of the mirror, staring at herself for a long time. She had done everything right. She had worked hard for everything she had, and now she was about to stand in front of a judge and prove it. Her lawyer had prepared her well. She had the documents, the deed to the house, the mortgage papers, the emails, the proof of Brian's infidelity. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about taking back everything he had stolen from her, her confidence, her independence, her peace of mind. And today, she was going to take it all back. She arrived at the courthouse early, her heart racing with anticipation. The building was imposing, a gray monument to bureaucracy, but Elena felt no fear. She had nothing left to lose. She had already won, even before stepping inside the courtroom. This was just the formalization of the truth. As she entered the courtroom, the air seemed to change. The room was full of people, all watching the drama unfold. Brian was already there, sitting at the table with his lawyer. He looked the same, smooth, composed, as if none of this was really happening. But Elena knew better now. She knew the truth. She sat down, facing him for the first time since the night he had ordered her to leave. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. She wasn't the same woman she had been then. She had fought too hard to let anything or anyone make her feel small again. The trial began with the usual formalities, the judge calling both sides to present their cases. Elena's lawyer stood up first, presenting the evidence. The deed, the mortgage documents, the emails that showed Brian's deceit, and the sworn statement from Janelle, confirming that Brian had been engaged to her while he was dating Elena. Every word that was spoken made Elena feel more grounded, more sure of herself. Brian's lawyer tried to discredit the evidence, claiming that Elena had manipulated the situation. But Elena wasn't listening. She didn't need to defend herself anymore. The truth was on her side, and that was all that mattered. Then it was Brian's turn to speak. He stood up, his hands shaken as he began his defense. His words were all excuses, justifications for his actions, but Elena could see the cracks in his story. The lies were too thin now. Everyone in the room could see it. "Your Honor," Brian began, "I know I made mistakes. I wasn't perfect, but I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought Elena would understand. I didn't want to lose her. I was scared." Elena didn't flinch. She didn't react to his words. She'd heard them all before. This was just another act, another attempt to make her feel sorry for him, but she wasn't going to fall for it again. "I don't need your apology," Elena said, her voice calm but firm. "I don't need your excuses. I needed you to be honest with me, and you weren't. You used me. You lied to me, and you hurt me." The courtroom was silent as she spoke. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time, Brian's composure cracked. His face turned red, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. He didn't know what to say. He couldn't defend himself anymore. The judge looked at both of them before speaking. "It is clear to me that there has been a great deal of dishonesty in this marriage. Elena, you have provided ample evidence to support your claims. Brian, your behavior throughout these proceedings has only added to the severity of your actions. I find in favor of Elena." The words hit Elena like a wave of relief. The years of silence, the doubts, the pain, it was all over. She had won. Not just the house, not just the legal battle, but her dignity, her self-respect, her life. Brian's face fell. His lawyer tried to offer a final plea, but the judge was firm. "You will vacate the premises within 30 days, Brian, and I suggest you begin to make plans for your future." Elena stood up, her hands steady at her sides. She didn't look at Brian. She didn't need to. He had no power over her anymore. She walked out of the courtroom with her head held high, and for the first time in years, she felt like she could finally exhale. Outside, the air was crisp and fresh. The sun was shining, and Elena felt the warmth of it on her skin. She had done it. She had fought for herself, and now she was free. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she knew one thing for sure. She was done waiting for someone else to make her feel whole. She had always been whole. She had always been enough. As she walked down the steps of the courthouse, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't just the end of her marriage, it was the beginning of everything else. She was free to be who she was meant to be, and that was worth more than anything Brian had ever offered her. The days following the court ruling felt almost surreal to Elena. The immediate rush of victory began to settle into something deeper, something more like peace. For the first time, she had space to breathe, to think, and to build a life that belonged only to her. The house, once filled with tension and shadows, now felt different. It was hers in every sense. It was no longer the backdrop of her marriage. It had become the foundation of her future. The silence in the house was no longer oppressive. It was comforting, calming. Elena spent hours reorganizing the rooms, not to erase memories, but to make new ones. She let go of the old, discarded anything that no longer served her: photos, furniture, gifts that had once been tokens of a life she now realized she never wanted. The walls were painted in soft shades of white and light gray, a color palette that invited light in. She filled the space with things that reflected her true self. A few well-loved books, plants that she had carefully tended to, new furniture she had picked out herself. She wanted everything to be a reflection of the person she was becoming. And, becoming, she was. Elena didn't waste time wallowing in her past. She didn't have the luxury of staying stuck. She had dreams, big dreams that had always been there, waiting. When she was younger, she had silenced them, put them away out of fear of not being good enough, of not having the right to aim so high. But now, those dreams seemed more like promises, promises to herself. She threw herself into her work, into her design studio. She rented a small office downtown, a space that felt like hers from the moment she walked into it. She decorated it with the same care she had put into the house, and soon, word began to spread. Clients started calling. They didn't care who she had been married to. They cared about the work she did, the creativity and vision she brought to the table. Her first major project was a local coffee shop redesign. The owners were thrilled with her ideas, and Elena threw herself into the work with a focus and dedication that she hadn't known she had. It felt good to be needed for something she was good at. It felt even better to be in control of her own destiny. One afternoon, as Elena was wrapping up some sketches at her office, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it absent-mindedly, expecting another client request or a follow-up. Instead, it was a message from an unknown number. "I'm Janelle. I need to talk to you about Brian." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to hear from Janelle again. She had already done what she needed to do, but Janelle's message carried a weight that made Elena's breath catch in her chest. Elena typed a quick reply. "Sure, come by whenever you can." The next day, Janelle appeared at Elena's office, her face a picture of exhaustion mixed with relief. She had an air of someone who had carried a heavy burden for far too long, and Elena could see in her eyes that the weight of the truth had been hard for her too. They sat down, and Janelle opened the folder she had brought. Inside were more documents, more proof. Elena listened carefully, her heart heavy with the realization that Brian's lies were even deeper than she had thought. "I found out about a few things," Janelle said quietly. "Some of it I didn't know when we first talked. I didn't want to come here, but when I heard your name, I knew I had to." Elena nodded. She had expected something, but not this. More lies, more betrayal. Janelle had discovered that Brian had been running a secret bank account, one that Elena didn't know about. There were several large transfers that had been made while they were still married. Money that wasn't accounted for. Money that he had tried to hide. Elena felt the anger rise in her chest, but she didn't let it show. She had known there was more to the story, but hearing it from someone else, hearing the depth of Brian's deceit, made her realize just how much he had taken from her. "I want to make sure he can't do this to anyone else," Janelle said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want him to face the consequences." Elena looked at her, feeling the weight of the words. She had come so far already, but this was another step, and this time she wasn't going to be silent. "I've already contacted my lawyer," Elena said, her voice steady. "We're adding fraud to the case. He won't get away with this." Janelle nodded, the relief in her eyes clear. She stood to leave, but before she went, she turned to Elena. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't think I would have ever had the courage to confront him if it weren't for you." Elena smiled, a genuine smile that came from deep inside. "We're both stronger than we thought, don't forget that." The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings and preparations. Elena's lawyer added the fraud charges, and she found herself standing at the center of the courtroom once again, this time with a sense of calm that surprised even her. She wasn't just fighting for the house anymore. She was fighting for the truth, for everything she had worked for, and for the woman she had become. Brian fought back. His lawyer tried to cast doubt on the evidence, but Elena stood firm, presenting the truth with the same quiet power that had carried her through everything. There was no fear in her. There was only the certainty that she was doing the right thing. And in the end, the judge ruled in her favor once again. Brian was ordered to pay restitution for the fraudulent transfers and was given 30 days to vacate the property. He was also required to pay legal fees. Elena didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. The victory wasn't about winning in court. It was about taking control of her life, about reclaiming everything she had worked for. A few days later, as she sat on the porch of her now quiet home, Elena found herself thinking back to the woman she had been. The woman who had been afraid to stand up for herself. The woman who had been willing to sacrifice everything for love. She wasn't that woman anymore. The air was warm, and the sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over the yard. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the peace settle us in. It had been a long road, but she had made it. She had chosen herself, and that was the greatest gift she could give. The sound of her phone buzzed again, and Elena picked it up, a smile spreading across her face as she read the message. New client referral. Let's build an empire. She typed quickly, her fingers dancing across the screen. Let's do this. For the first time in a long time, Elena felt a true sense of purpose. She was no longer defined by her past, her marriage, or the people who had tried to break her. She was defined by what she was going to build. This was only the beginning.